Hi, this is Susie with St. Louis Native Plants coming to you from my yard. I wanted to talk a little bit today about just some different things that we can do to apply design principles in a smaller setting like what we have here. Sometimes it's harder to figure out what sort of plants to put into place and what is actually going to be appealing in a smaller space like this. And so being that we have a small yard in South St. Louis City, I figured this might be a good place to demonstrate a few things. I'm just going to walk through and highlight a few things that I think are the stars of the show right now. This landscape is an evolving landscape that continues through the summer and into the fall. There's multiple plants and seasons of interest going on in here, and so the things that you see now will probably kind of fade into the background a little bit as the growing season goes along, and then something else will move in and steal the show from there. So I'm going to start over here to my right, and there are some birds actually. We've got a fair amount of bird activity in the yard right now, lots of bees flying around, so you might see some bee photo bombs or video bombs. So first I want to highlight this lovely little plant here, which is called Robin's Plantain. It's a really nice ground cover. It has great fuzzy leaves. I'm not sure if you can see that. But this is a really great ground cover for kind of smothering out weeds and taking up, precious soil real estate to make sure that other invasive species or weeds are not moving into your space. These flowers are great for emerging spring pollinators, and they will be very supportive of that, but then these flowers will kind of fade, and then the leaves below will remain through the summer and into the fall, and even persist much through the winter time. I did not notice them browning out a whole lot this winter because we did have a pretty mild winter. So that's one of my favorite plants right now to look at. Right next to it, we have some pussy toes. We actually have a couple of species of pussy toes that are in Missouri. And this is one of my favorite ground covers too, and for another reason. This actually has a nice silvery foliage. So it's something that when you plant these in mass, you can really see it from a distance. It's got that pop, but not necessarily for the flowers as much as for that silver foliage. So it's a really cool plant. Right now we also have Columbine that is blooming in abundance. This is going to be a really awesome flower to have available as a nectar resource for those male hummingbirds, the ruby-throated hummingbirds that are starting to scout areas and nesting sites, seeking mates as they're coming back up from the south. And this, if you don't have a hummingbird feeder, this is going to be a really great plant to provide nectar for them as well. And then moving down here, we have a nice little combination of plants. So when we talk about different textures and foliage types, this is a really good example of that. So we have Heuchera here, which is this plant in front, which has kind of a wider leaf to it, very green, and then we've got the flower stalks that are just starting to kind of show up above it. And then behind it, we have Soft Rush, which is a nice plant that is semi-evergreen actually, and you've got those really straight kind of cylindrical stalks, really dark green. So that's kind of a cool contrast when you look at that behind the shorter plant in front here. The alum root basically is what that is. And then even over here, I really like the combination of, kind of the same idea where you have, this alum root and then this iris that is spreading outward more and more every year and coming up kind of in the middle of that with these really pointy, narrow stalks and the wider leaves down below, with that Heuchera. So just kind of a cool plant combination here that I really am liking. And then behind it, you can see, if you may have noticed, the swamp milkweed stalks that are, the dormant stalks from last year. And I cut them I left more standing this year than I did even last year, just to allow for some beetles and bees to actually nest in those hollowed out stems. Because it's what happens with a lot of native plants is that over time, you end up with these nice hollow stems. And maybe you can kind of see that here. You see how that pith, that center of the stem is has hollowed out, and so that's going to be a good location for a beetle or possibly a bee to go in and create a nest and actually lay its eggs. 70% of our native bees are ground nesters, but then the other 30% actually will nest in a place like this, in a hollowed out stem. We have some nice, delicate buffalo grass that's still coming in for the season. This is, it's looking a little shabbier right now, but still showing some signs of dormancy. I also really like the hardscapes next to things like Columbine, or placing rocks next to foliage. I think just anywhere that you can apply that, it's just a really beautiful combination to have something like that has edges, such as rocks, and then have plants which kind of soften the edges. Still some plants working their way in over here. We've got some Prairie Dog back there, and things that are just, we've got some Amsonias, some shiny blue stars still kind of working their way in. Those are still starting out for the year. And then again, we have more Heuchera. So obviously I like alum root, I like Heuchera. That's no surprise with this video. But behind it, so you'll see again, we have these wide leaves, and then behind it we have these more narrow, they kind of arc a little bit, but narrow pointy leaves. So I almost, if I were going to change anything about this little patch right here, is I would maybe add more of the fall glade onion, which is this stuff in the back, and it's going to be blooming in the fall. And I would add more of that just to contrast even more so with this that's in front with the Heuchera or the alum root. That way you just have a little more of that pop, a little more impact, and a bigger contrast of those two foliages. It's something that would be more noticeable perhaps. So, and then in this corner, we have kind of a mishmash of things that are coming in, but in a couple of months, this is all going to be just ground covers. We have some spice bush here that hopefully will be attracting the fun little spice bush swallowtail caterpillar that looks like a snake, if you've ever seen it before. And we have some celandine poppy that's a spring ephemeral, so it's actually just coming up in the spring. It's going to fade out. It is on kind of its last leg or at its peak. It's starting to produce a fair amount of seed. And once that kind of fades out, a lot of these other plants are going to be full and lush, and so they'll be taking over that space. Behind it, again, when we talk about contrast of foliage, globe sedge is a beautiful semi-evergreen sedge, and it gets a little more height on it, but this is going to be another really nice ground cover to suppress weed growth, and really a nice complementary plant to any other surrounding plants that have maybe larger leaves, or even with shrubs nearby like what we have here. It's just a really kind of cool complementary plant. It's going to do really well in wetter conditions as well. So I will only note maybe one other thing. This is kind of my native prairie area over here. It's a little less organized, but on this side, one other thing that I want to note as far as design principles go is that you'll hopefully be able to notice a little bit of an undulation or kind of a fluctuation of heights. So over here we have a little more consistent height, although some things are starting to grow in and they will grow taller over there. But then when we look in the center of the yard, you have some shrubs, you have some sedges, you have some grasses, some other herbaceous perennials. In the corner around the borders, there's going to be taller, most of the taller stuff is going to be around the edges of the border, of the yard. And so that you're not necessarily going to feel like you're being swallowed up in plants as you're walking, through the paths in the yard and have things falling in on you, because we don't want that in a smaller space. So I kind of try to keep the taller stuff, further away from the edge, unless it's something like a shrub that's going to hold in its place a little bit better, and I can prune it how I want to prune it. So, but other than that, I usually try to keep, a little bit shorter stuff that's going to be, closer into where people are going to be trying to move around. But there's a, pretty good contrast and change of heights of plant matter in the yard, and that's very intentional. It makes it much more interesting and gives it a nice sort of flowing sort of look to it. And so with that, I think I've said enough for today, and I will sign off. I hope all of you are staying well and enjoying our beautiful spring. Take care.